Welcome to the 2020 Writers' Trust Award, Career Honors Edition. Like a lot of other gatherings in our lives these days, the Writers' Trust has gone digital this year to award more than $300,000 to Canadian writers. In this series of interviews, prize jurors from each of the Writers' Trust Career Awards will be talking to recipients about their lives as writers, their work, and what's next for each of them. My name is Timothy Taylor. I'm a writer, journalist, and creative writing professor living in Vancouver. This year, I served on the Writers' Trust Engel Findley Award jury alongside writers Souvankham Thammavongsa and Kathleen Winter. This award is presented to a Canadian writer in mid-career, not for a single book, but for a body of work that anticipates future contributions. While this award comes with a prize of $25,000, it's equally important in its endorsement of the author's craft and courage. I'd like to thank the sponsor of this year's Writers' Trust Engel Findley Award, Donald Schmidt of Diamond Schmidt Architects. In a year as uncertain as this one, it's so encouraging to have supporters of Canada's literary community stepping up in such a significant way. Thank you for your continued support of the Writers' Trust. And with that, I'd like to introduce this year's Engel Findley Award winner, Kerri Sakamoto. Kerri is a writer of remarkable gifts. Like other readers, I first encountered her work in the novel The Electrical Field, an enthralling and beautifully written story of a Japanese-Canadian internment camp survivor who struggles with the spreading moral dilemmas surrounding the murder of a close friend. The Electrical Field was widely honored, including a Commonwealth Writers' Prize, a finalist spot with the Governor General's Literary Award, and the Kiriyama Pacific Rim Book Prize. Over subsequent years, Kerri has brought us two other very distinct literary works, 100 Million Hearts, and most recently, the novel Floating City, which won a Canada-Japan Literary Award in 2018. What's really striking to me about these novels is the distinctiveness of the worlds they beckon their readers to occupy, both the physical and the psychological landscapes that the characters are asked to navigate. And yet in each case, Kerri evokes the atmosphere and the characters' struggles within them with elegant lyricism and an unwavering focus. As the jury wrote about Kerri's work, these are unapologetic and meticulous excavations of the human heart and the dilemmas of personal history. We're really lucky to have Kerri as a part of the literary conversation in Canada, and I feel lucky to sit down and chat with her today. Welcome, Kerri, and congratulations once again.
Thank you so much.
Kerri, take us back to the beginning. Are you one of those writers who scribbled from very early on, or do you remember other first inklings of the idea that you might be writing?
I think it all goes back to grade 3 and Mrs. Schmidt's class, where I wrote a story called "How to Make a Stuffed Doll Out of a Sock," and the teacher read it out loud in class at parent-teacher night, and my mom was especially proud, and she was really encouraging. After that, she was like a stage mom. No, but I think seriously, I think I always was interested in language and the potential of language to tell stories and just convey sensations and emotions. Yeah, so I think I would say very early on it was set.
And then the first publication in book form is The Electrical Field. And it is a magnificent book. It's intricate, it's personal, it's enthralling, and it comes out to very significant acclaim with the different prizes and the finalist positions that it won. How important was it for you to start fast, or does it feel fast when you think back?
Well, let's see, I have to say there was a long gap between grade 3 and the publication of that book, which was in 1998. And it felt like it took my whole life to write that book, because it really, it was sort of tied up with my own involvement in community work, working on the redress movement that sought compensation and restitution for the internment of Japanese Canadians. And I don't think I could have written the book without having gone through that experience. And actually, I worked alongside Joy Kagawa and had read her book, her incredible seminal work, Obasan, and she sort of took me under her wing, both as an activist and kind of as a model of a writer and sort of breaking ground, groundbreaking kind of writer. And so when the book came out, I guess it was a shock that it received so much attention, but it was gratifying because I think, the historical dimension of the story was really important to audiences, to media, and it casts new light on internment, and I was really interested in writing about the residue of that experience on my generation, and how it was passed down from my parents and my grandparents, and that kind of keeping of secrets, and how it still seeps into your psyche.
A writing colleague in Vancouver once said to me, every novel teaches you how to write it. One thing that I mentioned that has struck me about your work is the distinctiveness of the novels. And I wondered if you could comment a bit on the process of writing them. So you've described the birth of the electrical field in work that you did as an activist. How did you go from there? What was the way that you structured your approach to this novel?
Well, I should say it also, the process involved a sort of pilgrimage to the site of the camps where my father and my mother had been interned during the war in the interior of British Columbia, and that was kind of difficult for them. In fact, my mother really didn't want to. She didn't want to stay very long on at the site of the camp where she had been, which was called Tashmi, which I write about in Floating City, because of the pain of having lost her brother there. Her brother died in a camp, in an accident in the camp, and there weren't any medical facilities, and he died kind of a painful death. And she was just 15, and that's such a formative age, and I think that really affected her. It shaped her life and her character. So that was a really, it was a very emotional and meaningful experience to go through with my parents, because it wasn't easy for them. But then I guess I with that book, I really wanted to do something with an unreliable narrator who really wasn't able to tell her story in a straightforward way, because I think that's something that happens to people who are survivors of trauma. They're not able to just speak openly about their experiences.
How did that differ from 100 Million Hearts, for example? I wonder if you could talk to me about the kernel of that book, where it's not so much where the idea came from, but at what point had it clustered to the point that you knew it was a novel, and then how did you proceed forward with that material?
Well, again, that kind of arose out of family history. I had two older uncles who've now passed away, but they were before the war, they were sent back to Japan. They were born in Canada, but they were sent to Japan to be raised by my grandparents, because their grandparents, sorry, because my grandparents were very poor, and they were sent to Japan to be raised there. And when the war broke out, they were not able to return, and they spent the years there. One of them worked in intelligence, because he could speak some English. And so I really was thinking about how, you think about immigrants traveling in one way, from east to west in this case. But we don't think about how people's lives take different turns. And I thought about the experience of being in Japan for someone who was Canadian born and being caught there and caught between allegiances, and also not fully of the culture. So 100 Million Hearts was really born out of that, and in the most intense kind of experience of war there in Japan was the experience of the suicide pilots.
Now, in a way, it feels like a departure, some of the dreamlike quality that pervades Floating City. And when I think about a writer writing a novel like that, I sort of almost wonder if it came to them in a dream. Have you been interested in architecture for a long time, Buckminster Fuller, or where was that born?
Well, okay, so Buckminster Fuller came to me because a good friend of mine who's an architect, a Japanese-Canadian architect, Bruce Colbera, he happened to tell me about the fact that Bucky had proposed a floating city, a floating community for Toronto Harbour back in 1970. Of course, it never been built. And I was so shocked that it actually got to the point of being presented to City Council. And that, so there was that fanciful thing, but it was the idea of a kind of utopian community, because the camp was the ultimate dystopian community. So I think it grew out of that. And yes, I have had an interest in architecture. My father-in-law is actually an architect, retired now. He was the lead architect for the Scotiabank Plaza in Toronto. But the idea of skyscrapers and space, and this is something we're thinking about now with COVID, all these empty office towers, and at the same time, homeless people. So the idea of how people choose to use resources, the idea of everyone being entitled to shelter and a quality of life, it's just been important to me.
Books take time. You and I both know this. And talk to me about living with a novel for a long time, sustaining it, and watching it evolve and change. What your experience has been in that regard?
Oh, well, my books take a long time. And I have to say, the writing took longer after I got married and had a family. But it was worth it. I think I really need space to ruminate in my head, and it's difficult when you have children. If you have demanding children, but at the same time they take you into their worlds, and I think that's really why Floating City took on this sort of magic realist dimension of a wider world of ideas. And I did really want to take the book out of just the experience of one community and that history to something beyond, and to something around future possibilities. And Buckminster Fuller is just still so relevant, his ideas, and even more so right now. And it's interesting because, he built the geodesic dome. He was the inventor of the geodesic dome, the American Pavilion at Expo 67. And that geodesic dome is based on the same mathematical or geometrical kind of patterning as the shell of the virus, including COVID, the COVID virus. So, which speaks to how, we need to share information across disciplines and ideas from architecture, fiction, storytelling, science, so all of this is really exciting to me. And I feel like Bucky really became my friend, and he actually had such an affinity for Japan and Japanese culture and island cultures in general.
How much did you have to learn? How much research was involved, or did a lot of this come from sort of your organic interests prior to starting the novel? Tell us a bit about the research practice.
Well, it was a little daunting because Bucky was incredibly prolific. He actually kept this archive, which is he called a chronophile, that's somewhere in California, and in which he kept every piece of ephemera, including like plane tickets and snubs from restaurants. He did this incredible kind of self-documentation and a kind of self-mythologizing, I guess. So there was a lot of material. But I think he also it struck a chord with me because a lot of his ideas I could see reflected in my father's ways. And the idea of making do with what you have, or and he had this his maxim was do more and more with less and less until you do everything with nothing. So, the ultimate, extreme. And I feel like my father was an example of that, of doing something. Bucky also said his own life was a kind of experiment in taking himself as an example as an ordinary man, which he actually wasn't, but an ordinary man and accomplishing extraordinary things. And I feel like my father did that in his own quiet way, in terms of the difficulties and challenges he overcame. And so there was that dimension to it too, and also the moral kind of question around what racism does to you in terms of your personal ambitions and greed, and Frankie has this kind of moral dilemma around trying to achieve as much as he can and amass a fortune in order to sort of even the odds because of what he's gone through and the deprivation he suffers, but there's redemption for him.
I'm really intrigued by the way that you describe research leading you to places of personal overlap, and then the research, which is a reading project, becomes very animated. And I wondered in that process, which can be quite exciting, have there been points where you have to stop yourself? I know, speaking as a writer who does research myself, I sometimes have to sort of curtail the celebration of material that I'm finding. And I wondered if you ever if you came to that point with Bucky or with research into other areas.
Well, there were a lot of family stories that I had to let go of. There were things, and that was difficult because they were sort of precious. They've been passed on to me, and my parents are now both gone. And but I realized I had to let go of some of those things. Bucky was definitely very enticing, and there's just so much material. And one of the problems actually that I had was marrying the two ideas around family history and Bucky, and I had a lot of people telling me not to do that I had to just tell a straightforward multi-generational immigrant and diasporic kind of tale. And I really, it was so important to me to bring in Bucky and the idea of this aspirational, this dream of creating a utopian kind of community. So I almost let it go. And there were people, including an agent, who really, really was adamant that I give up Bucky, but I couldn't. He was already my buddy. So
that may be part of the answer to my next question. But when every novel, I think, for most writers, presents a challenge at some point where it feels like the whole thing might collapse or our commitment to it might flag. And these are the low points of what are many-year projects. And I wondered if you could talk a little about I suppose, if you hit similar points and how you overcome them, and how does the writer carry on through that moment?
Oh, um, well, oh, geez. My my husband is a great support. I mean, you have to, you have a little support group of people around you who believe in your vision, but also will be honest with you. I think I have really trusted readers, including my husband. Um, but you know, I just I guess even though it's really difficult, I tell myself that no writing is ever wasted, and that you just keep writing through. And you may have to throw away, but um, it's not wasted. It's all making you a better writer. So I know it's easier said than done, and I've agonized over things, and I've had so many rough spots, and this is why this award is so special and meaningful. It's because you just have to keep pushing through those doubts and difficult times. um, that's all I can say. You just keep reading and keep writing and reading, and yeah.
And nothing is wasted is a great idea. I think that's very compelling. So I really appreciate that. I don't know many writers who can't make use of that wisdom. Let me ask you a final question, turning to the future. What's interesting you now? Is there a Buckminster Fuller in your life? Is there a project that is beginning to crystallize, or are you well on your way perhaps to something new?
Well, I'm on my way. Not well exactly, but I'm on my way. And it feels like a really new chapter. A friend of mine said, I feel like your first three books have been like a trilogy in terms of just the central preoccupation, and the way that Floating City, I feel, points to the future. Um, and because motherhood has just been such a dominant role in my life, and I became a mother kind of late in life. So this book is definitely about motherhood, and well, that's all I can say, really. It's sort of making do with what I have, since this is my life, is mothering right now. um, that's, yeah, that's what this book is. That's the starting point of this book.
Well, I know a lot of people will be looking forward to it, Kerri, and I certainly have enjoyed chatting with you today. Congratulations again on the award.
Oh, thank you so much, Timo. If I can just call you Timo.
Thank you, Kerri, and congratulations once again. Please note, everyone, that you can listen and watch other interviews with this year's Writers' Trust Career Prize winners on SoundCloud at Writers' Trust, or on YouTube at Writers' Trust of Canada. On YouTube, you can also watch the Writers' Trust Awards Emerging Writers Edition and Books of the Year Edition, celebrating the best in Canadian literature.